"Daddy, what if they don't like you?" 7-year-old Marcus looked up at his father with worried eyes as they stood together in their tiny Brooklyn apartment. The morning sun streaming through the window and casting golden light across the worn wooden floors. Dwayne Mitchell knelt down to meet his son's gaze, adjusting the boy's backpack straps with gentle hands that had worked countless late nights on freelance projects just to keep food on their table. "Then I'll keep trying, little man," Dwayne said softly, pulling his son into a warm embrace and breathing in the smell of the cheap shampoo they shared. "Your grandpa always told me that good things come to people who never give up, and I believe that with my whole heart." Marcus nodded slowly, his small fingers reaching up to touch his father's freshly shaved face, feeling the smoothness that came from the careful preparation Dwayne had done the night before. This interview at Monroe Creative Group meant everything to them, a chance to escape the constant worry about rent, about groceries, about whether the lights would stay on another month. Dwayne had spent 3 years building his portfolio one small job at a time, designing logos for local restaurants, creating flyers for church events, making business cards for neighbors who paid him whatever they could afford. Now, finally, one of the biggest creative agencies in New York City had called him for an interview, and he felt like his entire life had been leading to this single moment. He walked Marcus to the bus stop, watching until the yellow school bus disappeared around the corner, then checked his watch and began the journey into Manhattan with hope beating strong in his chest. The rain started falling just as Dwayne emerged from the subway station on Madison Avenue, fat drops that splattered against the sidewalk and quickly turned into a steady downpour that seemed determined to ruin everything he had prepared. He pulled out his small umbrella, the one with the broken spoke that made it lean slightly to the left, and held his portfolio tight against his chest like a shield protecting his most precious treasure. His suit was second-hand, bought from a thrift store in Queens, and carefully altered by Mrs. Patterson down the hall, who refused to take any money for her work, saying that helping a good father was payment enough. The fabric was starting to absorb the rain despite his best efforts, and he could feel the cold water seeping through to his white dress shirt underneath. But he kept walking with determination in every step. He whispered his father's words like a prayer as he moved through the crowded streets. Arrive early, stay calm, speak clearly. The same advice that had guided him through every difficult moment since his father passed away 5 years ago. His father had been a janitor who worked 2 jobs his entire life, a man who never had much money but always had time to help anyone who needed it, teaching Dwayne that kindness was the only currency that truly mattered in this world. Those lessons had shaped Dwayne into the man he was today, a single father who worked himself to exhaustion but never complained, who read bedtime stories to Marcus every night, no matter how tired he felt, who believed that integrity and compassion would eventually be rewarded even when the world seemed determined to prove otherwise. When Dwayne reached the corner near the towering glass building that displayed the Monroe Creative Group logo in elegant silver letters, he allowed himself a small smile of relief because he was actually going to make it on time. But then a sound cut through the noise of honking cars and rushing pedestrians. A woman's voice filled with fear and desperation calling out for help that seemed to go unheard by everyone around her. Dwayne turned and saw a black luxury car stopped in the middle of the intersection, hazard lights blinking frantically as other drivers laid on their horns and shouted angry words through their windows. Inside the car sat a woman in an expensive business suit, her hair plastered to her face from the rain that was coming through her partially open window, her hands shaking as she repeatedly turned the key in an ignition that refused to respond. She looked terrified and alone, despite being surrounded by hundreds of people, and something in her eyes reminded Dwayne of how he felt after his wife left, abandoned and scared and wondering if anyone in the world actually cared. He glanced at the Monroe building, so close he could almost touch it, then back at the woman who was now crying as she tried desperately to call someone on her phone. His interview was in 12 minutes, and helping her would certainly make him late. possibly costing him the opportunity he had worked 3 years to earn. But his father's voice echoed in his mind with perfect clarity, speaking words that Dwayne had heard 1,000 times growing up. If someone needs help, you help them, son, even if the whole world is too busy to notice, even if it costs you something, because that's what good people do. Dwayne closed his umbrella and stepped into the street without another moment of hesitation, the rain immediately soaking through his suit jacket and running down his face in cold streams that he barely noticed. He approached the passenger side of the car and tapped gently on the window, offering the frightened woman his warmest smile despite the circumstances. "Ma'am, I'm not here to hurt you," he said loudly enough to be heard over the honking horns and the pounding rain. "I just want to help if you'll let me." The woman looked at him with wide eyes that held a mixture of fear and desperate hope, and after a moment, she nodded and unlocked the door so he could hear her better. "The car just died," she explained, her voice trembling as she gestured helplessly at the dashboard. "I have the most important meeting of my career in 15 minutes, and I can't get it to start, and nobody will stop to help me. They just keep honking and yelling like I chose to break down in the middle of the street." Dwayne could see the tears mixing with rain on her cheeks, and he recognized that particular kind of panic that comes when everything seems to be falling apart at once. "Pop the hood for me," he said calmly, already moving toward the front of the car. "I used to work at my uncle's auto shop during summers when I was a teenager, so maybe I can figure out what's wrong." He lifted the hood and let the rain pour over him as he examined the engine, checking connections and looking for obvious problems, while ignoring the symphony of angry horns that surrounded them. His fingers found a loose battery cable, corroded and barely making contact, and he used his bare hands to clean the connection and secure it properly, despite the grime that covered his palms and stained the cuffs of his carefully pressed shirt. "Try it now," Dwayne called out, and he heard the woman turn the key with shaking hands. The engine coughed once, twice, then roared to life with a sound that made them both exhale with relief. He closed the hood and walked back to her window, rain streaming down his face as he smiled at her genuine joy and gratitude. "Oh my God, thank you so much," she said, reaching for her purse with trembling hands. "Please, let me pay you something. Let me give you my card. Let me do something to repay you for this kindness." Dwayne shook his head gently, glancing at his watch and feeling his heart sink when he saw that his interview had started 3 minutes ago. "You don't owe me anything, ma'am," he said quietly, the disappointment evident in his voice, despite his efforts to hide it. "I'm just glad you're okay and that you can make it to your meeting." The woman stared at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something like wonder mixed with confusion, as if she couldn't understand why someone would sacrifice something important for a complete stranger. "At least tell me your name," she insisted, and there was something in her voice that suggested she wasn't used to being refused. "Dwayne Mitchell," he answered, already stepping back onto the sidewalk as traffic began to flow around her moving vehicle. "I hope your meeting goes well." He watched her drive away, then looked down at himself and saw the ruined suit, the mud-stained shoes, the portfolio that was now damp, despite his best efforts to protect it, and he felt the full weight of what he had just lost settle onto his shoulders like a heavy blanket. The walk back to Brooklyn felt endless, each step heavier than the last, as Dwayne replayed the morning in his mind and wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. He arrived home to an empty apartment and sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands, staring at his phone and trying to find the courage to call Monroe Creative Group and explain what had happened. But what could he possibly say that wouldn't sound like a ridiculous excuse? That he missed the interview because he stopped to help a stranger fix her car, that he chose kindness over his own desperate need for employment. He finally picked up the phone and dialed the number, prepared to apologize and beg for another chance. But the receptionist who answered sounded confused when he gave his name. "Mr. Mitchell, we've been trying to reach you for the past hour," she said in a tone that made his stomach drop. "Ms. Monroe wants to see you in her office tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp." and she said to tell you that it's extremely important." Dwayne's mind raced as he tried to understand what was happening, wondering if this was some kind of formal rejection, or perhaps a second chance he hadn't dared to hope for. He spent the rest of the day in a daze of confusion and anxiety, picking Marcus up from school and going through the motions of dinner and homework and bedtime stories while his thoughts kept returning to that mysterious phone call. That night, he lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of his encounter with the woman in the broken-down car. And something about her face kept nagging at him, a familiarity he couldn't quite place. The next morning, Dwayne put on his only other decent outfit and made the journey back to Manhattan with Marcus's encouraging words echoing in his ears and his father's old watch on his wrist for good luck. He rode the elevator to the top floor of the Monroe Building, where the receptionist led him down a long hallway lined with awards and photographs that documented the company's impressive history. The door to the corner office opened, and Dwayne stepped inside to find himself face to face with the woman from the intersection, now perfectly composed in an elegant dress with her hair styled beautifully, standing behind a massive desk with a nameplate that read Victoria Monroe, Chief Executive Officer. Dwayne's legs nearly gave out beneath him as the realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, and he grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself while Victoria watched him with those same eyes that had been filled with tears and fear just 24 hours ago. "Please, sit down, Mr. Mitchell," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk with a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. "I imagine you're quite surprised to see me here." Dwayne lowered himself into the chair on legs that felt like jelly, his mind still struggling to process this incredible coincidence that seemed too impossible to be real. "You're the CEO," he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. "The woman in the rain, the broken car, that was you." Victoria nodded slowly, her expression shifting from amusement to something much deeper, something that looked almost like reverence. "I've run this company for 15 years, she said quietly, "and in all that time, I've learned that you can tell everything you need to know about a person by how they treat someone who can do nothing for them." Victoria stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city that spread below them like a kingdom of glass and steel in endless possibility. "Yesterday, I was on my way to a board meeting that would determine the future of this company," she continued, her voice soft with emotion. "I was terrified and alone, and hundreds of people walked past me without a second glance, too busy with their own lives to care about a stranger in trouble." She turned back to face Dwayne, and he was stunned to see tears glistening in her eyes. "But you stopped, Mr. Mitchell, even though you were clearly dressed for something important, even though the rain was ruining your clothes, even though helping me would cost you something precious." She picked up a folder from her desk and handed it to him, and he opened it with trembling hands to find an employment contract with his name on it, offering him a position as senior designer with a salary that made him gasp out loud. "I don't need to see your portfolio," Victoria said firmly. "I don't need to interview you about your skills or your experience or your 5-year plan. I need people with character, Mr. Mitchell, people who understand. That success means nothing if you lose your humanity along the way." Dwayne felt tears streaming down his own face as he stared at the contract that represented everything he had ever dreamed of for himself and Marcus: stability and security and a future bright with possibility. He thought of his father, the simple janitor who had taught him that kindness was never wasted, and he wished more than anything that his dad could see this moment, could know that those lessons had finally led somewhere beautiful. Victoria extended her hand across the desk with a warm smile that transformed her entire face. "Welcome to Monroe Creative Group, Dwayne," she said. "I have a feeling you're going to do extraordinary things here." 3 months later, Dwayne stood in the lobby of the Monroe Building for the company's annual charity gala, dressed in a tailored suit that actually fit properly, watching Marcus run around with the other employees' children while Victoria gave a speech about the importance of community and compassion. She told the story of the stranger who had helped her in the rain, the man who had sacrificed his own opportunity to assist someone he thought he would never see again. And she announced that the company was establishing a new scholarship fund in honor of people who chose kindness over personal gain. Dwayne felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to find Victoria standing beside him, watching Marcus laugh with the other children, her expression warm with genuine affection. "Your father raised you well," she said softly, and Dwayne nodded as tears threatened to spill from his eyes once again. Later that night, as he tucked Marcus into bed in their new apartment, one with 2 bedrooms and heat that actually worked, and a view of the park where they could play on weekends, his son looked up at him with those same trusting eyes. "Daddy, why do you always help people, even when it's hard?" Dwayne smiled and kissed his son's forehead, thinking of his father, of Victoria, of all the moments that had led them to this place of warmth and safety and love. "Because, little man, kindness is never lost," he whispered, pulling the blankets up to Marcus's chin. "It just sometimes takes a while to find its way back home."